Welcome to A Woman's Heart. I am looking forward to this conversation. It has already been a warm and fun conversation. Welcome to A Woman's Heart, Deborah Raney.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's great to be with you.
Yes, as I said, I am looking forward to this conversation. I had the rare opportunity to actually sit down and read your book all the way through.
Yay!
Yes, I was
Doesn't
on an
happen very
airplane.
often.
I
I
was on an
appreciate that
airplane.
so much.
Yes. So I just sat down in my seat, nice long flight, and I just started and got to read all the way through and just completely immerse myself in the story and everything else. And I so enjoyed that. But before we dive more into your book, I would love to get to know you a little bit and let my listeners get to know you a little bit. So please tell us a little bit about yourself. And then I also like to ask for something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
Okay. Well, there's things that aren't normally in my bio that I probably wouldn't share, but I have a couple of fun things too.
Yes.
So
Oh, don't we
I
all?
am I am first of all a wife and a mama and a grandmother, a Mimi to 14 grandkids. So
14. Oh my gosh,
14.
your cup
Yeah.
runneth over.
Yes, oh, it does. Seven of them are here in Missouri, and we moved from Kansas to Missouri 6 years ago to be closer to. We more than half of our grandkids lived in
Oh, yeah.
Missouri at the
I've
time,
heard
but
they're worth
then,
it.
yeah, oh, they are so much. But then we also have seven grandkids in Texas, and so we
Oh,
we make a lot of trips to Texas. So
okay.
that is those are my most cherished callings. But you're probably talking to me because I'm also an author. And
Yes.
I
Yes.
started writing 30 years ago to put our kids through college.
Okay.
And for many, many years, every royalty check I got went to some college. And then finally, there came the day that they were all through college with their degrees, and I got to spend a royalty
And
check.
you got a big pay raise.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I have just I thought, the Lord would just let me write one or two books, and I'm 40 plus novels in and still just loving what he's called me to do. So,
Wow.
uh,
Wow. Yeah, my hat's off for the amount of creativity to one come up with a story like that and then everything that goes with it and over 40 books. That is truly an accomplishment. Truly an accomplishment. And your latest series is The Who Touches, correct?
it's The God Who
God
is the
Who, the
name of
God
the
Who.
series.
Okay, yes, the God Who, because the book that I got to read as part of the summer reading series is Who Touches the Mountains. And I got to, as I mentioned, I got to just sit down and just totally dive in and immerse myself. And as I told you before I started recording, one of the things that really struck me, even before I got into the story, was this book is set in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, which I am actually originally from North Carolina. So already you've got my heart
Yeah.
with North Carolina and that. But the timing of it was you set this in the Blue Ridge Mountains and you based it off of some really beautiful towns, and then
Yeah.
the hurricane hit.
Yes.
And I would love to for you to tell us kind of why you set it there, some of the towns that you were mentioned, and then what
Sure.
you've done about that.
Sure. Well, I started teaching at the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference probably 20 years ago and just fell in love with that part of the country. And once our kids were grown, then my husband had his own business and he started coming with me to those conferences. And there were times we even talked about maybe retiring there. That was before we had grandkids, that were
Yeah, that might be a little far from
affecting where we live. Yeah. But anyway, I always knew I wanted to set a novel there. And I'm one who feels like I have to immerse myself in a place before I feel good to write about it. And so we made a special trip there. It was actually during the Blue Ridge Conference, but I wasn't teaching there that year. And so we just went and lived in an Airbnb for a week. And we were in Chimney Rock and Black Mountain and
yeah.
several of the little towns around there. I had my novel partway written when we went there. I came home and continued to write, and then the hurricane hit. And I wasn't even sure if it would be right for me to continue and finish that novel. I didn't want anyone to think that I was trying to profit on the fame of that part of the country at that point.
Yeah.
But then I realized that what I was writing truly was a tribute to the people who
Mhm.
lived there and the faith that they had and how they trusted God to bring them through those things. And so my husband and I talked about it, and I decided that I would donate a portion of every book that is sold to the Samaritan's Purse, is where I am sending that to, because they have helped greatly with that. Well, I don't know if you call it rebuilding or revitalizing, whatever. There was
Yeah.
so much,
Yeah.
so much work that needed doing. But
Yeah. Well, and so much work that still needs to
yeah.
be
Oh,
done. And
yes.
part of the
All this
tragedy
coming
is,
later.
yeah, everybody kind of sees it when it's right there at the forefront. And then after a couple of weeks, the
Yeah.
rest of the world kind of moves on and forgets,
That's true.
whereas that community is still struggling and still
Yeah.
trying to put things together. And I believe Chimney Rock is one of those that they're not sure
Yeah.
it was just completely
Yeah,
wiped out.
it was. We looked at the pictures, and I went back and looked at the pictures I had taken on my research trip, and it was just unrecognizable as the
Oh,
same place. It was just, I mean, we would look at a street that was just wiped off the map and water and mud flowing, and
mm,
we sat in that little cafe and had coffee, and it's gone now, you know.
mm,
So yeah,
yeah.
but even more devastating, all the homes that are gone and those that lost loved ones, and just it was a devastating thing. So anyway, I pray that for everybody that reads my book, a little bit of that of what you spent went to help the cause. And so
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So not only do you get a wonderful, warm book to just immerse yourself into, you know, that it's part of the money is going to help rebuild that area. And as we mentioned, we know a mutual person that was in that area and greatly affected, Pepper Basham. She was on the summer reading series last summer, and I included her latest book on the summer reading list for 2025 because she's got some new books out. So hopefully people will go back and listen to that
Yeah,
with
Pepper is
Pepper. And
wonderful.
yes, she
She
really is. She's
she serves on the board of American Christian Fiction Writers, and I was on that board for 18 years, and
oh,
Pepper came
wow.
on just after I stepped down from the boards.
Okay,
So it's
wonderful.
great to have
Wonderful.
her
That's
there.
exciting. I'm sure she's going to do a
Yeah.
great job with that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, along with people buying the book and a portion of that going to help with the I'll say recovery efforts and
Yeah.
rebuilding efforts in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. What were some of the other things that you really wanted people to learn? You give us a little synopsis. Of course, we're not going to give anything, big away about the book, but tell us a little bit about the book
Mhm.
and what you're really hoping that people will gain from it.
Okay. I always have to think because I'm already working on the second book in the series. And so I have to
Which
remember,
book
okay, now
is
which,
this?
which characters are in this one? But this one is about a travel writer who thought that being a travel writer and traveling all over the world was going to be her dream job. And the blush is off the rose, and she's
Mhm.
not sure now what she's going to do with her life because she's kind of left everything behind in order to do this.
Yeah.
And so she comes and stays in an Airbnb, and there are many Airbnbs in the town of Black Mountain is where the
Yeah.
actual town. And I did use fictional names for my town.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons that we do this is because it's very likely that if you talk about a coffee shop in a book, by the time your book comes out, the coffee shop will have changed hands and changed names
Yes.
and so anyway. But anyway, my characters are both kind of dealing with what do you do when life doesn't look like you thought it was going to look, when your dreams came true even, but it wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. And so both of those characters are dealing with that. And because I am a Christian and that is my frame of reference, my characters are always dealing with what is God trying to teach me through what I'm going through.
Mhm.
And I never set out to have an exact theme for my novels, but 9 times out of 10, it seems like the theme ends up being in my novels how God redeems our lives. And yes, redeems them in the sense that he died for us and we get to go to
Hmm.
heaven if we believe in
Yeah.
him. But even more than that, here on earth in this fallen world, how God redeems the things that we are going through.
Yeah.
Sometimes because of our own stupid mistakes or lack of wisdom or immaturity, sometimes just because we live in a fallen world and bad things happen to good people sometimes. But I have found in my own life and in the life of friends that follow the Lord, sometimes it takes a long time for us to see
Yeah.
how he's
Sometimes it takes
working.
so much longer than we want.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And it doesn't match up with a pretty picture that we paint.
No, it doesn't. But he is always there and he always redeems. And sometimes in ways, I always, our oldest daughter says, I would make such a good God because I have such great ideas for how he could fix everything.
You know, they made a movie about that and it didn't turn out real well.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yes, no, and she is being very facetious. She knows better.
Oh, yes. Yes.
But
I'm stressed out just trying to handle my own life. No way I want to handle everybody else's. That's way too much
yeah,
pressure.
yes, me too. Me too. But anyway, what I write is almost always about how God can take even the toughest situation and he has an answer. And very often his answer is, well, always his answer is way better than anything we could come up with on our own.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to look back on the things that we have been through. And it's usually only in hindsight that we see God's hand all over our lives when we follow him. And
Yeah.
even sometimes when we don't, even sometimes when we are being rebellious and not doing what we know we should do. So,
Yeah, God can still use all of that. Well, one of the things that I like to ask sometimes along the your writing journey, what are some of the things that God has taught you as you've been writing these stories? Because I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that when you're writing these stories, it's
oh,
not
yeah,
just the creative process of doing that. God's working in your life as well and teaching you
absolutely.
things. And what are some of those lessons that God has taught you?
Sometimes I'm a little scared to start writing about a certain issue because it's often God will put me in the situation where I am going through it, usually on a smaller scale than what my characters are going through, but just as an example, I'm writing about a character. This was in a novel called Forever After, who is married to a wealthy man, and she has learned to enjoy a very wealthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we've never been wealthy, but we have never wanted for anything. But about the time that I was working on that novel, my husband was laid off of his job.
Uh,
And so we had to make some serious cutbacks and just it was a whole lifestyle change for us. And it ended up being the absolutely best thing that ever happened to us, but it didn't feel that way in the midst of it. But I
yeah.
was able to write my character in so much more authentic ways because I was experiencing on a smaller scale what she
Yeah.
was going through in the novels. So
Very good. Very good. And now, is there anything that I would say has surprised you that you weren't expecting at all along your writing journey?
oh, many things. First of all, I was expecting to write one novel, and then
Okay.
I just really I that's what I wanted to do with my life was write one book before I died. And here I am 40 books later. I never saw that
Yeah.
it might be a career. So that certainly surprised me. My first novel was made into a movie. I never expected that to happen. And that was pretty amazing. And
Mhm.
honestly, I really feel like God used that whole situation to continue my career because my first novel sold okay, but it wasn't a bestseller or anything like that. And I may not have gotten another
Yeah.
contract had it not been for the movie, which kind of was a nice boost
Okay. Yeah.
for sales on the book. So. Um,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, I could go on. There are so many things. The whole thing has been a wonderful surprise. So,
Oh my gosh, that is wonderful. And you mentioned the redemption, and that is a common theme among several of your books.
mhm. Yes, I bet 75% of my books that it ends up being the theme. Even if I try to shoehorn a different kind of theme in there, that, excuse me, that turns out to be it. Part of the reason for that is that I write women's fiction. And so often my characters are going through some kind of a tragedy, a trial, a dilemma that they are faced with. And so that kind of lends itself to that kind of, of God working in their lives in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we mentioned that a lot of times God will work, through the books in teaching you a lesson. The theme of redemption coming up then lends to me, I'm kind of curious, what in your life do you feel like God has really redeemed?
Uh-huh.
And why this theme keeps coming up? What do you think God's trying to tell you with that?
That's interesting. I guess one thing that I see is that when I was growing up, I grew up in the 70s when the glass ceiling had been broken. Women
Hmm.
could do anything they wanted to do. All my friends in high school wanted to be doctors and lawyers, and I wanted to be a mom. That's the only thing I really wanted. And I
Hmm.
wanted 12 children until I
Oh
had
my.
three.
I never wanted 12.
But when I was 17, long before I was married, doctors started telling me that I probably would not be able to conceive. And at the time, I had always wanted to adopt some of my children. And so I just thought, well, that's okay. I can adopt all 12 of my children. I did not know what I was wishing for at the time. Um, but as it turned out, I gave birth to four children. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so that in itself was a huge redemption of, of my dream, to be a mom. And then my parents had six granddaughters and six grandsons, and I always said I wanted to match that, and I have matched
Okay.
it plus
You've
two.
exceeded.
So,
I don't
yeah,
know about the
that's right.
even 6 and 6, or I guess with
Yeah,
14 it'd be 7 and 7. I don't know if you
but
match them
we're
evenly, but you've definitely hit the 12 plus mark.
for sure. We're heavy on the boys. We only have four girls among the 14, but
Okay.
we love them all. They are amazing kids. So
Oh, yes, yes. Well, and either way, you still get a little taste and you still get to buy the
that's
fun little
right.
girly things, and then you get
That's
to
right.
buy the cute little suits. When I had my son, he had a cute little suit with a bow tie, and either way, the little baby shoes just get me every time. I don't know what it is about
Oh,
him.
they do. They do for sure.
Maybe it's the thing about my shoes in anyway. So, oh my gosh. Now, are there you we mentioned that this book, Who Touches the Mountains, is the first in a series,
Uh-huh.
and you are working on something else. I'd love you
Uh-huh.
to give us a little sneak peek as to what else
Sure.
you're working
Sure.
on.
We actually just got back from a research trip to St. Simon's Island, Georgia, and Jekyll
Oh,
Island, and that's
oh,
where
I
this
love
next
Jekyll
book.
Island. I've not been to St. Simon's, but I have been to Jekyll Island, so I will
Yeah.
need to check
Yeah.
this out and see if I
Yeah,
recognize things.
good. They are both absolutely wonderful places. And I first became aware of those places when I was a young, probably a teenager,
Mhm.
and started reading Eugenia Price's novels. And they were set on St. Simon's Island,
Okay.
built around she used real historical characters, but Christchurch was part of
Hmm.
her novels. The people that, preached there and attended there, that was just a big part of her novels. And I had always wanted to visit there. And Ken and I went, I believe it was in about this time of year in 2021 that we went for the first time. And it was just a dream trip. At that time, I wasn't really thinking of setting a novel there, but then the wheels started turning. And
Hmm.
so the whole series, the God Who series, came about when our pastor was preaching through the Psalms, and I started noticing how often the Psalms talk about God as the God who touches the
Okay,
mountains, the
yeah.
God who this next one I'm working on is the God who stirs up the sea. And so I started thinking, where's there a sea that I could, that I could set a novel?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah,
St. Simon's Island won, and that's what this one is about. So
very good. Now, do you know how many books are going to be in this series? Do you know?
I have four planned. I could
Okay.
see this go on forever because there truly are a lot of scriptures about the attributes of God, being the God who
Yeah.
numbers the stars. It will be the third novel, and then
Okay.
there's several others that I could do. So
Yeah, well, and I think of settings. You've got the mountains and you've got the sea, and then okay, the
yeah,
numbers, the stars. So I
I
guess
think
you're going to base it more on the Psalms versus locations because I'm thinking of the desert and the wilderness.
yeah, no, and I do not like the desert. We're not going to the desert. It's funny because I grew up in on a farm in Kansas, and that's where I think you can see the stars best. But
Oh,
my husband thinks, yes, we should go to some desert and look at the stars. And so,
well, and I've learned that that is sometimes, as far as when you look at the history of the Hebrews, the wilderness or the
mhm,
desert is
mhm,
frequently where God meets people. And
that is true.
instead of, we in the Western world want to just hurry up and get through the desert
Yeah,
times in our lives. We just want to hurry
yeah.
up and get out of it. And the Hebrews are like, no, they're like,
Mhm.
no, let's say stay here and really soak up what God has to teach us and really soak in his presence. And they want to cherish the memories and the lessons that they learn during
Yeah.
those times. And it's a very different way of looking at it. So I don't know, maybe I've convinced you to do a
Well,
desert.
it's funny because my husband convinced me to get a camper and start traveling and camping. And there's a scripture in the Bible, I couldn't tell you the reference, but it does talk about camping and God in camping with us. And it's that
Yeah.
idea of what you say,
Okay.
how
So
we learn and grow through the difficult times. And yeah.
okay. Okay. Well, hopefully, God will touch your RV and keep it safe as you're traveling around,
Thank you for that.
researching all
Yeah.
of these. And I know this has been a passion of yours for many years. And I always like to ask, what would you say to encourage someone else to follow the passion that God has placed in their heart?
This is because he had to tell me and teach me this, but the first thing is to make sure that your passion is also God's passion, because I've been passionate about things that weren't necessarily God's will for me. And then the second thing is to be patient and be sure sometimes God calls us to something, but the time isn't right yet.
Mhm.
And like I said, from the time I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to someday write a novel. But God first gave me the important job of being a mom to my kids.
Yeah.
And I remember I was sharing that dream of writing a book with a friend, and she said, "Why don't you start now?" And I had thought about that, but I knew that if I started writing while my kids were little, that passion for writing would push, a place where that it would push my kids out and the time that I should spend with my kids. And so I just really felt like God was telling me, yes, this is a dream and I may give it to you, but not now. The time isn't yet. And it's okay to dream about it. It's okay to plan for it. I did a lot of reading when my kids were young, not
Brilliant.
just reading stories to them, but
Mhm.
reading myself. And I learned so much just through reading good novels. But there was a definite day when God said, today is the day to sit down and start writing that novel. And it's a kind of a fun story. The way it all came about is that our three older children were 14 and 10 and 8. So our oldest son was not too far from going off to college, and I knew that I would need to start writing, or not writing, but I would need to go back to work to help make money for college because I'd been privileged to be a stay-at-home mom, but we had not saved any money for college. And so I was prepared once the kids were all in school to go back to work. What I didn't know was that God would give us another baby. And so when it was time for me to go back to work, I had a 3-year-old. And I
Nice
so
surprise.
yes, she was shock. It was way more of a shock, especially when we did the math of how old we would be when she was finally grown up and gone from home. But God told me, I just felt like he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, that book that you've always wanted to write, start writing. And so on New Year's Day, 1994, I sat down and I wrote what became the prologue to my first novel, A Vow to Cherish, the one that was turned into a movie. And I wrote every day. I even wrote on Sundays. And I'm not one who thinks it's right to work on Sundays, but at that time with that first novel, writing felt like worship because I felt like God was just pouring into me. And I take Sundays off now. That's the only book that I have ever written on Sundays with. But by the end of 5 months, I had a finished novel and started sending it out. And it's too long of a story to tell now, but the bottom line is that when I got a contract for that book in October of that same year, the publisher, Bethany House in Minneapolis, wanted a two-book contract. And the advance on royalties that they paid me was to the penny what we had just been told our son's 4 years of college room, board, tuition. And so that just felt like God blessing
Yeah.
the work of my hands. And
Yeah, such a God wink. That
yeah,
is
very much.
amazing. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Well, and you mentioned that you don't normally write on Sunday. I think there's a time and a season, and if you really felt like that's what you were being called to
Mhm.
do versus driven or
Yes.
pushed
Yeah.
to do, and as you said, that was your form of worship,
Yeah. It
and
really
what a
was.
beautiful way
Yeah.
to worship Him as part with all of that. Well, Deborah, if someone wants to get the book, get more of your books, connect with you, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. Well, I am online. I am one of these odd authors that loves social media. I am an
Good
extrovert,
for
and
you.
if I had to just sit in my office and write and do nothing else, I would never survive. So I love to meet people on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on X not quite as much, but I do appear there ever so often. My website is deborahraney.com, and
Okay.
people can contact me through that. You can send me an email or find out more about my books there. And I always like to send people to their local Christian bookstores, first of all. And if they don't have my books, they can order them. And
Okay.
and then, of course, they're on Amazon. All of my books are on Amazon. So,
Yeah, so wonderful. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for
you're
your creativity and your passion for writing and sharing some beautiful, fun stories. I enjoyed my first foray into your books, and I look forward to reading some more. And
thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today.
Uh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Lisa.